Have you ever really stopped to ask what the foundations of faith are built on? I mean, really built on? It's a huge question, and for hundreds of millions of people, the answer isn't just one single book. You see, for the vast majority of Muslims, there are two primary places they turn to for guidance. You have the Quran, which is believed to be the direct word of God, and then you have these enormous collections of reports about the Prophet Muhammad's life, known as the Hadith. These two are treated like the twin pillars of Islam. The Quran gives the divine law, and the Hadith collections are said to show the prophetic example of how to actually live that law out. But here's the thing. What if one of those pillars, one that so many people believe is absolutely essential, is resting on a foundation of, well, hearsay? All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the foundation of these reports and ask if they're really built on solid ground. Then we'll put a single report under a microscope to see how it holds up. After that, we'll dig into what it really means to obey the messenger, see what the Quran says about other reports, and uncover a pretty surprising pattern from history. And finally, we'll see where all this evidence points in the hunt for one final standard. Okay, so for most Sunni Muslims, right after the Quran, the most vital books are the 6 major Hadith collections. People call them the authentic 6. I mean, they shape pretty much everything. Law, daily life, ethics. They're seen as an absolutely indispensable part of the faith. But this is where one critical fact comes into play that just changes the entire picture. The timeline. The Prophet Muhammad passed away around 632 CE, but these collections, the authentic 6, they were all written down in the 9th century. That's a gap of over 200 years. Just let that sink in for a minute. 2 centuries. So, what does a 200-year gap actually do to information? You know what? Let's stop talking in abstracts and let's get concrete. Let's zoom in on one single report. And to be totally fair, we'll take the very first one from what's considered the most trusted collection of them all, Sahih al-Bukhari, and really put its reliability to the test. So here it is, pretty much how you'd find it online. A simple, profound teaching. And notice how it says, narrated by Omar bin al-Khattab, a direct companion of the Prophet. It sounds so direct, right? So clean, almost like you're reading a direct quote from someone who is right there. But that simple presentation, it's hiding a much, much more complicated reality. When you actually look at the original text, you find something totally different than that tidy English translation. It's not a direct narration from Omar at all. So this isn't a direct quote. It's actually a 6-person chain of he said that he heard that he said. The compiler, Imam al-Bukhari, he heard it from a guy named al-Humaydi, who heard it from Sufyan, who heard it from Yahya, and on down a line of 6 people to get to the supposed eyewitness, Omar. It's literally a game of telephone stretching across generations. By cutting out this chain, the translations create this illusion of a direct link, when really it's a long, fragile chain of passed-down stories. And that brings us to a really important question. What do we call this kind of information? Well, in pretty much any other context, we have a word for it. Hearsay. It's secondhand information. It's a rumor, something you can't actually prove because you didn't hear it from the source. And you know, in a court of law, it's almost always thrown out because it's seen as fundamentally unreliable. So let's just apply that same common sense standard right here. Let's imagine for a second we're putting this piece of evidence on trial in a modern courtroom. The compiler, Imam al-Bukhari, is on the witness stand, and the judge asks him one very simple question. Sir, did you personally witness this? Did you hear the Prophet say this with your own ears? He'd have to say no. He'd have to list that entire chain of names. Well, al-Humaydi told me, who was told by Sufyan, who was told by... And the judge would have only one logical follow-up. Okay, so where's the original witness, Omar? But you can't bring him to the stand. Why not? Because the only person who was supposedly a direct witness, Omar, had been dead for over 150 years before the compiler, Imam al-Bukhari, was even born. There is no way to cross-examine anyone in that chain. The evidence would be thrown out. Case closed. Inadmissible hearsay. So if the chain is based on hearsay, why on earth is it considered a pillar of faith by so many people? Well, the main justification comes straight from the Quran, which tells believers again and again to obey the messenger. This command, this is at the absolute heart of the whole conversation. Now, how you interpret that command is where everything splits into 2 completely different paths. The standard view is that this sets up 2 distinct authorities. You obey Allah by following the Quran, and you obey the messenger by following his sayings and actions, recorded in the Hadith. But there's another way to see it. An alternative view that says there's only one source. It suggests that obeying the messenger simply means obeying the one divine message he was sent to deliver, the Quran, period. And this verse right here is absolutely crucial to that alternative view. It seems to fuse those two commands into one single act. It doesn't say obeying the messenger is like obeying Allah. It says it is obeying Allah. The obedience isn't split between two sources. It's for one message, delivered by one messenger. The argument is simple. The messenger's entire mission was to deliver the message he received, which is the Quran. So obeying him is just another way of saying, obey the Quran he brought. So this idea naturally leads to a huge question. Does the Quran itself ever point to another source for guidance? Does it ever say, hey, you'll need these other reports to understand me? Or does it claim to be totally sufficient all on its own? And what's so fascinating is how the Quran uses the word hadith itself. The word just means report or saying. And right here, the Quran calls itself the best hadith, the best report. And that's not just a one-off thing. The Quran poses this exact question. It asks, rhetorically, after you've gotten the report from God himself and his verses, what other report? What other hadith could you possibly need to believe in? The argument being made is that the Quran points back to itself, again and again, as the only hadith we should ever follow. Now, right about now, you might have a very understandable objection. Something like, okay, that's interesting, but how could billions of people for centuries all be wrong? That's a powerful argument, right? The argument from tradition and consensus. But the Quran itself seems to present a very consistent and maybe even uncomfortable pattern when it comes to what the majority does. I mean, just look at this timeline, drawn straight from the Quranic stories. With Noah, almost nobody believed. With Abraham, it was literally him against the world. With Lot, with Moses, with Jesus, it's the same story every single time. The narrative is incredibly consistent. God sends clear guidance, and the vast majority of people reject it because they'd rather stick with the traditions of their forefathers. In that story, following the crowd is just not a reliable path to truth. So all of this leads us to the final and most critical point in this whole line of reasoning. If human transmission is just fallible hearsay, and if following the majority isn't a safe bet, then what's left? What can you actually rely on? Let's just recap the case we've been building here. 1. The chain of transmission is built on hearsay, stuff that wouldn't even be allowed in a courtroom. 2. The command to obey the messenger is really about obeying the single message he delivered, the Quran. 3. The Quran itself claims to be the best and only hadith to follow. And 4. History, according to the Quran, shows that the majority isn't a guarantee of truth. All of this points in one direction, toward a single, divinely protected, incorruptible standard. And this is where it all comes together. From this point of view, this isn't just an academic debate about history. It becomes the most fundamental issue of all. This is the concept of shirk, the one unforgivable sin in Islam. It's the sin of associating partners with the one singular God. So the argument, laid out as forcefully as possible, is this. To take the words of men, words passed down for centuries as unreliable hearsay, and raise them up to the same level of authority as the direct preserved word of God, is to compromise the most important principle of all, God's absolute oneness. This act itself is presented as a form of shirk, which would make any other book of religious law not just an unnecessary addition, but a direct violation of the faith's core belief. And so we end with this final, incredibly provocative question, taken directly from the Quran. The verse asks, point blank, do you bear witness that there are other gods with Allah? The argument we've explored recasts this entire debate, suggesting that when a person testifies that other books are equal sources of divine law, they are, in effect, answering yes to that very question. And it leaves us all with a final thought to wrestle with. Is the path to pure, uncompromised monotheism found not by adding more books, but by returning to just one?